Ethan was the kind of guy you didn't notice, which was a damn shame because he was brilliant. He blended into the background, whether at school or at home. Our classmates barely knew he existed, and his parents weren't much better, treating him like a ghost. But I knew Ethan. I was his only friend, the only one who saw the depth of his pain and the sharp edge of his intelligence. That night of the senior ball, everything changed. Ethan had gathered enough courage to ask Sarah to be his date. She was pretty, and the two had been in the same classes for ages. He had a massive crush on her. It was a bold move, out of character, but he was desperate to break free from his isolation. She laughed in his face. The rejection was public, brutal, and devastating. I tried to comfort him, but Ethan had already begun to retreat into a dark place. He was caught staring at her on multiple occasions by teachers. He started muttering to himself one day in class and didn't realize it until the other students told him. His mother complained once that he would keep talking with a childhood clown toy for hours on end. His father was typically out hunting with his buddies, too indifferent to care. I should have seen the signs, should have done something, but I didn't. On the night of the ball, Ethan wasn't there when I arrived. I figured he was too embarrassed to show up after what happened with Sarah. The gym was decked out with streamers and balloons, the usual cheap decorations for a high school dance. Kids were dancing and laughing. I tried to impress my date, Jenna, with my dry humor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. It was about an hour into the ball when the lockdown alarm blared. The lights flickered, plunging us into semi-darkness. Panic spread through the crowd, cries of confusion growing louder. I had a sinking feeling in my gut, Ethan. The gym doors burst open, and there he stood, a twisted figure in the doorway, wearing a clown's mask. He held two of his father's hunting rifles, walking in with a deliberate calm, a man on a mission. "Ethan, don't," I shouted. "They will see me now," he replied, his voice eerily calm. "They will all remember my name." Screams erupted as he fired the first shot, hitting a kid named Mike square in the chest. Blood sprayed across the dance floor, and chaos ensued. The crowd scrambled, ducking under tables, pushing each other in a desperate attempt to escape, but there was no way out. Ethan had locked the doors. I was frozen, watching as my friend turned into a monster. He moved methodically, shooting indiscriminately. I saw him shoot Rachel, the cheerleader who had mocked his weight the previous year. Her lifeless body crumpled to the floor. He turned and fired at Mr. Thompson, our math teacher, hitting him in the shoulder. I knew I had to do something. Ethan's rage was consuming him, and he was taking innocent lives in his fury. Summoning all my courage, I yelled out, "Ethan, stop. This isn't you." He paused for a moment, looking at me through the mask. For a brief second, I saw the Ethan I knew, the boy who had been my only friend. But the darkness quickly reclaimed him, and he raised the rifle again. Teacher, who tried to shield a group of students. The bullet tore through his shoulder, and he went down with a scream. "Ethan, stop. This isn't you," I shouted, but my voice was lost in the chaos. Ethan didn't hear me, or he didn't care. He kept talking to the voices only he could hear, justifying his actions and condemning those who had wronged him. I saw Sarah huddled under a table, sobbing. I knew he wouldn't stop until he had her. Pushing through the panicked crowd, I tried to reach him. The closer I got, the clearer I could see the darkness in his eyes and the twisted determination driving him. With every step, the weight of what was happening pressed down on me. My best friend had become a monster, and I was the only one who might be able to stop him. Madness in his eyes. He wasn't the Ethan I knew. This was someone else entirely. Whatever demons he had in his head, they had conquered him. I just wish someone would have called 911. "Ethan, it's me, Jeremy. You don't have to do this. Let them go." He turned to me, and for a moment I saw recognition in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the same cold rage. He raised his gun, and I felt a sharp, burning pain in my side as the bullet tore through me. I fell to the ground, clutching my wound, the world spinning around me. "You'll all remember me," Ethan said, his voice distant and detached. Madness in his eyes. He wasn't the Ethan I knew. This was someone else entirely. Whatever demons he had in his head had conquered him. I just wish someone had called 911. Ethan, it's me, Jeremy. You don't have to do this. Let them go. He turned to me, and for a moment I saw recognition in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the same cold rage. He raised his gun, and I felt a sharp, burning pain in my side as the bullet tore through me. I fell to the ground, clutching my wound, the world spinning around me. You'll all remember me, Ethan said, his voice distant and detached, shouldered with a perpetual scowl etched into his face. He had played some soccer himself back in the day, from what I had heard. Everyone knew him as the dad with a short temper. His son Billy was good, but not quite there yet. I knew this would be a tough conversation, so when I picked the lineup and kept his son on the bench, Donald stormed over. What the hell, coach? Why isn't Billy on the starting team? Donald, Billy's a good player, but he's not ready yet. We've got some tough competition. He didn't take it well. His face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before, and he started shouting, hurling abuses at me. You think you know everything, don't you? My boy's better than half of those kids out there. The other parents backed me up, trying to calm him down and reminding him it was just a game. But Donald wasn't listening. His rage was palpable, and I could see something was off in his eyes. Finally, he spat at my feet, grabbed Billy, and stormed off. I thought that was the end of it, but I was horribly wrong. Minutes passed, then maybe half an hour. I heard a commotion outside, a scream from the parking lot. I turned just in time to see Donald marching back towards us, but this time he wasn't empty-handed. He was carrying a semi-automatic rifle, his eyes wild and his face contorted with fury. This is for my son. You think you can humiliate him, humiliate me? Panic erupted. Parents scattered, kids screamed, and I froze. Donald opened fire, and the world exploded around me. I felt a searing pain in my leg and crumpled to the ground, blood soaking through my pants. The agony was overwhelming, and I could barely think. I crawled towards the nearest cover, dragging my useless leg behind me. Around me, the scene was utter chaos, people running, bodies falling, and screams of terror filling the air. Donald kept firing indiscriminately. I reached a concession stand and huddled behind it, gasping for breath. My vision was blurred, but I had to stay focused. I had to survive. Peering around the corner, I tried to gauge Donald's location. He was close, too close. They snatched my dream. Not my son. His voice was a mix of rage and madness. He spotted one of the parents who had supported me earlier, and with a crazed look, he pointed the gun at him. He made the man kneel in submission, his anger barely contained. The poor man was crying, desperately trying to find words to reason with Donald, but Donald paid him no heed. With a cold, determined gaze, Donald pulled the trigger, sending a single bullet through the man's head. The body swayed slightly before crumpling to the ground. Donald's gaze shifted, and he spotted me. He started towards me, the crunch of his boots on the gravel and his heavy breaths marking his approach. Donald, stop. This isn't going to solve anything. Think about Billy, I shouted, desperate to reach any part of him that might still be sane. But he was beyond reason, consumed by his rage. Hearing me, Donald raised the rifle, and I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. A gunshot rang out, but it wasn't from Donald. A police officer had arrived, aiming at Donald. The bullet struck Donald in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the rifle and fell to his knees. You ruined everything, he muttered as he collapsed, the fight draining out of him. The police quickly swarmed in, disarming him and securing the area. I lay there, pain throbbing through my body, but a wave of relief washed over me. Paramedics rushed over, tending to the wounded. I was loaded onto a stretcher, the chaotic scene slowly coming to a grim resolution. The world spun around me, faces blurred and voices muffled. The last thing I saw before passing out was Billy standing alone amidst the chaos, tears streaming down his face. The horror of that day was etched into my soul. I had faced death and emerged alive, but I knew I would be scarred for life. Despite teaching at St. Mary's Covenant School, right next to an old graveyard, I never believed in ghosts. Local lore spoke of nuns roaming the grounds after sunset, supposedly the spirits of sisters who had tragically perished in a fire decades ago. They said that if you stayed late, you'd hear prayers mixed with cries for help. Despite these chilling tales, I had never experienced anything myself until that fateful day. It was a Friday afternoon when the principal announced a lockdown. Apparently, a mass murderer had escaped from a nearby psychiatric facility and was reportedly on the loose. The authorities advised everyone to stay inside, so we were trapped in the school until further notice. Normally, the school emptied out before sunset, but that day I found myself in the eeriest of predicaments, locked in with a handful of students with a graveyard just outside our windows. The sky darkened rapidly, and the hallways felt increasingly oppressive. The students, ranging from nervous to outright terrified, huddled in the assembly hall. I tried to keep them calm, but I could feel the chill settling in. The principal asked a few teachers to check around and see if any students were still left in their classrooms. I volunteered and grabbed a flashlight from the supply closet. The power was still on, but the long corridor seemed unnaturally dark. My footsteps echoed as I made my way through the silent halls, classroom by classroom. I checked empty desks and silent chalkboards, nothing unusual, until I reached room 212. The door creaked open, and I was hit by an inexplicable chill. My breath fogged in front of me. The room was dark, save for the thin beam of my flashlight. As I scanned the room, the beam caught something reflective on the floor. I moved closer and gasped. It was a tiny silver cross necklace, lying in a pool of dark, liquid blood. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. The temperature plummeted, and I heard faint whispering words I couldn't quite understand. I yanked at the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. "Help! Someone please," I shouted, but no one responded. Everyone was elsewhere. The whispers grew louder, now, mingled with the soft sound of footsteps. Spinning around in the dim light, I saw them, shadows moving across the walls. 3 figures in nuns' attire, their faces dark and decayed, gliding towards me. Their whispers grew stronger and more distorted, blending with the footsteps to create a haunting symphony of dread. I backed against the door, desperately pulling at the handle, but the figures grew closer, their prayers becoming louder. One of them reached out, and I suddenly felt an icy grip around my wrist. I screamed and yanked my arm free, but the force sent me crashing to the ground. My head struck the edge of a desk, and pain exploded through my skull. Darkness edged my vision, but I fought to stay conscious. The whispers grew deafening as the figure loomed over me. One of them bent down, looking into my eyes while letting out a disoriented whisper. It raised its dark, decayed hand towards me, but suddenly stopped as it spotted the cross around my neck. That was the break I needed. With a burst of adrenaline, I crawled towards the door. My hand found the handle again, and this time it turned. I burst into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. The whispers ceased, but the cold lingered. Stumbling back to the assembly hall, I clutched my bleeding head. Miss Jenkins, who taught languages, looked up with wide eyes filled with fear. "Caroline, what happened?" she asked urgently. "We need to get out now," I replied, as the lights in the hall suddenly flickered and went out. The figure's dark, decayed hand reached toward me, but it halted as it spotted the cross around my neck. That was the chance I needed. With a surge of adrenaline, I crawled toward the door. My hand found the handle again, and this time it turned. I burst into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. The whispers ceased, but the cold still lingered. I stumbled back to the assembly hall, clutching my bleeding head. Miss Jenkins, who taught languages, looked up with wide eyes filled with fear. "Caroline, what happened?" she asked urgently. "We need to get out now," I said, as the lights in the hall flickered once more, and then went out completely. The hall was plunged into darkness, and the wind that had been blowing suddenly ceased. Panicked screams erupted from the children at the back of the room. Everyone turned to see a dark figure in nun's clothing standing there for a few seconds before it glided to the other side of the room and vanished toward the back door. Chaos ensued. We quickly gathered the children, huddling them together as we moved toward the main entrance. The lockdown was still in effect, but staying inside felt more dangerous by the minute. As we reached the main door, we were relieved to find a police car outside, its lights flashing. A policeman walked up to us, urging everyone to stay calm. "We're here to evacuate you," he said. He informed us that the escaped murderer had been caught very close to the school and that everyone was safe. A wave of relief washed over us as we filed out into the cold night air, which was biting but welcome. I glanced back at the school, its dark windows staring back like watchful eyes. The local legends no longer seemed like mere stories. I left St. Mary's Covenant School shortly after that night, the events and the chilling encounter forever etched into my memory. She was pretty, and the two had been in the same classes for ages. He had a massive crush on her. It was a bold move, out of character, but he was desperate to break free from his isolation. She laughed in his face. The rejection was public, brutal, and devastating. I tried to comfort him, but Ethan had already begun to retreat into a dark place. Teachers caught him staring at her on multiple occasions, and he started muttering to himself in class without realizing it until the other students pointed it out. His mother had once complained that he would spend hours talking to a childhood clown toy,